Episode 15, Rico Racosky, retired Air Force pilot and retired commercial aviation pilot.
I never would have dreamed that it would have led to something better. At the time, it was felt like just such a disaster.
I'm Mark Graben. This is My Favorite Mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes, but what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. And I'm really excited we're joined today by Rico Racosky. In his career, he was first off an Air Force fighter pilot. He is also a recently retired airline captain, and I will try to avoid making bad jokes about our podcast having an on-time departure or an on-time arrival. You do not need to buckle your seatbelt before listening. Rico is the author of a book called Just Two Choices, and we're going to also have a chance to touch on that today. So Rico, welcome on board. How are you today?
Doing fabulous. Thank you, Mark. It's an honor and a privilege. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat today. And I love the title of your show. It's perfect.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope the line for security wasn't too long getting into the podcast.
Well, we did have some challenges, didn't we?
So looking back, your work and your career, as we talk about here on the podcast, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, my favorite mistake that has really contributed to even writing the Just Two Choices book is that growing up, I was interested in art and aviation. And I started off going to art school, and at the last minute got a call from the Air Force for an opportunity to have a flight school slot. And having let's just say a strong interest in both travel and in flying low and fast and flying fighters. When I went to flight school, it was the night before we made our decision to put in our choices for which jets we wanted to fly. And it's called your dream sheet in the Air Force. You write down which airplanes you wanted. And I was all set on going fighters right up to I was on my way to bed that night, the night before we had to have the sheet turned in. And I switched over to transports. Now, the reason I switched over to transports was that I'd already had about 2.5 years in the Air Force as an aircraft maintenance officer in the transport arena. And I was looking at creating, staying in the military and making it a full-time career. And so I chose to go the career path because if I switched over from fighters, I'd have lost, let's just say, about 3 years worth of seniority, so to speak, in the military. And so I chose to at the last moment to go head over and actually just fly transports. And after I made that particular choice, and I got the assignment I wanted for flying transports, and it was time to go to school for transports. By that particular point in time, I just had an enormous amount of regret, enormous amount of pain actually into why I made that particular choice that way, because I really preferred, let's just say it was probably 60-40 flying fighters over flying transports. And by making that switch, I just felt I'd made a really big mistake in my life. And fast forward through the rest of my life, the beautiful part about it is that with all the work that I've ended up doing with like Just Two Choices and some other books that I've written, that world travel as a transport pilot for 6 years before I switched over to flying fighters in the military was just an enormous gift that I never would have dreamed that it would have led to something better. At the time, it was felt like just such a disaster. And I know for some people it might be kind of hard to relate. Well, it's just an airplane. That's understandable. But it's something that I grew up with as a kid, all my life wanting to fly. And knowing the distinctions between those two different kinds of flying, it was really a painful time. And it went on for probably a couple of years till I started to see all of something better that was coming out of it. So I've had several of those kind of things, and I think you probably have a similar approach to things, Mark, and a lot of guests, a lot of folks listening have this similar kind of an approach, which is there's always going to be something good, it seems like, that comes out of something that at the moment seems like a disaster, or it seems like it's not going to work out, or you're not going to be able to recover from it. And so the gift to me has always been to, the just two choices approach. I can complain, or I can look for the silver lining, so to speak. And I think that really put me on that path for making sure I always look for the best opportunities to come out of something, even though at the time it didn't seem like the best thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there are often career choices or transition points that we go through. I mean, just share a little bit about my background. I'm an engineer. I started my career focused on manufacturing for the first 10 years of my career. I thought that was going to be my entire career. And then 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to start doing similar process improvement consulting work in healthcare. And I thought, well, this could be a mistake, but I thought, well, at the least, I'll learn something from that experience that I could take back I can get back onto my primary career path. The thing I couldn't predict is that, 15 years later, what I thought might have been a temporary detour into healthcare turned out to be more of, a sustained change. So I think, sometimes when we make choices, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, like when making a choice, or as we'll talk about your book, Just Two Choices. Maybe you can help with that framework a little bit. How do you help evaluate choices when you're really uncertain about which one is the best for the long term?
Well, I kind of look at it as, and that's why I call the Just Two Choices book, and again, that's why I mentioned my background in art. It's a visual. There's a diagram that has, if you were to take your hand and put your hand about 90 degrees and, take the peace sign or a V sign with your fingers and turn it horizontal, the upward vector of the index finger, is the choice that's going to take you in let's just say the positive direction, and your middle finger pointing down is the choice that's going to take you in the opposite direction, or take you in a direction of what you necessarily don't want. And so that's how I look at, and that's a great question, because thinking back on it now to that day in flight school, the just two choices moment, right? When you make one, and there are only just two choices. That's why computers are binary. Everything's a 0 or a 1. It's not 0 and 1. And so, when you energize one choice, you de-energize the other. So you kind of get a double benefit. And so what I chose to energize in the long term that I thought was, at the time when I had to make the choice to turn the paperwork in, was the choice that of a career in the military was going to be my long-term goal. And prior to that particular point, I hadn't really. So I was thinking about promotion. I was thinking about upward movement within the Air Force. And if I stuck with having been an aircraft maintenance officer on transports, on two different kinds of transports, and then I went and flew, the bigger transports. There was also a thing called the C-17 that was coming out at the same time, a new transport jet. I could be, probably an initial pilot on the C-17, all of which translated militarily into promotion, And so I decided to actually say, I'll go the promoted route. And so that was the long-term choice. It's just that after I had made the choice, which, I started to have those second thoughts. So to answer your question, the vector that goes up in the upward direction, which I call choice number one, did have that long-term factor in it at the time I made the choice. And then you just have to ride it out. There's nothing you can, unless you got a crystal ball and you're, or you're psychic, you just got to ride it out, and does that help in terms of what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking one other question that comes to mind. Was there was there conflict, do you think, between, let's say, your heart and your head? Like, was your heart in flying fighters, but your head said, well, the rational better choice, as you were saying, from a career perspective, was to switch to transport? Was it like that, or was it something different?
I think I think a good way to describe it. I think if I look back on it now, and especially having been blessed to have been able to switch over to flying fighters, which is a rare thing. Once you've gone the transport route, to have been able to switch over and do that, and having flown F-16s, and it definitely is where my heart is. Is in the speed and the kind of precision that goes into all the thought process of aerial engagements and those kinds of things. I think that is much more of my nature over the over transports. Although I do love world travel, and and there's fabulous people. I wouldn't trade it. It's just that, to answer the question, the heart is probably more in the fighter range.
So as you were going through, you described, that years of regret. What was your strategy for sort of, trying to manage that regret or cope with it? Was it a matter of reminding yourself why you made that choice to switch in the transports, or what else did you do to sort of just help manage your feelings about that?
Well, at first, because I'd been in the Air Force for about 2.5 years as a non-flyer, I kind of knew how the system worked. So at first I tried to work within the system to get them to change the assignment. And, if you believe in divine intervention, every phone call I made to the different fighter people who coordinated those kinds of assignments in different ways, I just missed the cutoff. You know what I mean? It's like, if you'd have called last week, we could have switched you. So I think it kind of made me kind of laugh and say, well, I guess there's more to this than what I'm seeing, because there were several phone calls that were just you just missed it, man.
Yeah.
And so that kind of settled things in. But that was my first response, for switching, and then for dealing with the situation and the conflict within myself.
Yeah.
And then I'm a positive guy, so it wasn't serving me well to stay in a negative state. So it was one of those things where I had just two choices. Idea didn't come till many years later, but basically I was using the just two choices process to sort it through and to help myself continue to choose to feel better, incrementally better about the outcomes. And like I said, going all over the world, not a bad gig.
Yeah.
And especially with the way the military hands you the keys, and says, call us if you got a problem, but get this stuff there, So yeah. It was very, very tremendously rewarding.
Yeah. Now, you'd mentioned earlier your interest, if not aspirations, in art. Looking back and maybe again weaving your just two choices framework, you had this choice of pursuing art or pursuing aviation. Like, I could share a little bit more about myself. Like, growing up as a kid, I was really into music. I played drums and percussion, and I was really serious about it. And I had a choice of pursuing music or pursuing engineering. I chose engineering, and I don't have pain or regret over that. But I was curious, how do you look back at your choice? And again, if you can explain it in the just two choices framework, that might be good for the listeners.
Well, in a just two, the one thing I did know was, even as an 18-year-old kid, the one thing I figured out was, I'm not going to get another, it's rare to get another opportunity to go, fly for the military. And so, art was something that it seemed to me that if flying didn't work out, I could always go back to doing art or pursuing art. And so that's what drove that. That's really what drove that decision. I'm from a small coal mining town in Steeltown in Pennsylvania, and Western Pennsylvania, outside a couple hours from Pittsburgh. And I knew that I knew intuitively, and I'm glad you asked the question, Mark, because intuitively, I knew that I always wanted to travel. I knew that I always wanted to see more than my hometown. And I love my hometown, and I love my relatives. And, I love the people I grew up with. It was just, my high school friends, just fabulous. It's just that, I just felt there was something bigger out there in the world, and I wanted to see what it was like. And so, all of that rich aspect tapped, is what helped that Just Two Choices moment to be the choice when the aviation opportunity came, to do that. So, how about you? What was your choice point there, that drove the one direction over the other?
I'll admit to being influenced heavily on this by my father, who is an engineer. And music would have been. I have friends who, are professional musicians, and it is a really tough living. And I had the opportunity to continue enjoying music as a hobby. So I was in the marching band. I was very heavily involved in music through college, and that's dwindled. I still have a pair of drumsticks here in my office. But I think part of that no regrets is like I think I didn't have the passion, and what I learned enough, like when I was a senior in high school and I was taking private lessons with a graduate student at the University of Michigan. This is really what sealed it. I had enough talent to do really well and to be the best drummer in my high school, and to enjoy playing with minimal practice.
Yeah.
I enjoyed performing. This graduate student from Michigan basically opened my eyes to the fact that if I did not love being alone in a practice room for hours upon hours every day, then I was like, yeah, okay, no, that's not for me.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a great way that's like, I can relate to that very, very well.
And I think that's different than saying I'm not lazy, but that idea of being just so alone and having to be that dedicated to that craft was, I decided that was not for me. And I think that was the right decision.
Yeah. And so, the thought that crosses my mind, I like what you're describing. The thought that crosses my mind is, how far do I want to take this? Maybe that's not accurate, but it seems like, at the time, how far did I want to take my art? How far did I want to take my aviation? I wanted to take my aviation as far as I could take it. And now, the layout of the book has a lot of art and graphics in it. And so now I'm satisfying, I'm satisfying that artistic side of myself. And the great part of it is there's just so much more I can do. Actually, I think the favorite thing that I look forward to is Just Two Choices, is being able to do animation of a lot of the topics that I'm working on, either myself doing it or having input into doing it. But, the technology wasn't there back then to be able to step into that. And so now it's almost like the aviation gave me that springboard and it, and interface with technology and those thoughts. And now the art has kind of caught up to being able to graphically design 3D models of what you see, 3D models of choice and Just Two Choices.
Yeah.
So,
if you'll forgive me, one more question about aviation. I'm curious about before we'll talk a little bit more about the book again. So, one of the themes on the podcast here is learning from mistakes, and that we all make mistakes, and it's a natural part of life in our professional realm. But clearly in aviation, there are a great number of mistakes that could end up being deadly. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about preventing mistakes and some of the things that aviation does to be so effective at preventing major mistakes.
I think you summarized it real well. That's exactly, exactly what aviation safety is about. Is think first of the consequences of the choice that you're about to make. And somebody asked me one time. They said, "Well, do you fly an airplane with just two choices?" And I said, "That's the only way to fly an airplane is just two choices, because you're either making the jet perform within the parameters it's meant to perform within, either just using the simplicity aspect of airspeed or altitude, or direction, navigating it. It's either on course or it's off course. And then, and to what degree then are you going to allow the jet, because it's under your control, for anybody who's flying, any human that's flying it, how far are you going to allow the jet to go? Either off altitude, off airspeed, too fast, too slow, too fast in terms of fuel consumption. Let's just use a simple thing, an aspect of it, or off navigation, miles off course or not very far off course. And so that very much what you just described is a great way of describing what goes on in aviation all the time. I mean, it's just two choices, and where are you going to catch that aspect that keeps the situation from exacerbating to something that is that could create a lot of problems.
And it seems like there's, from what I've talked to other pilots about, there's a lot of, obviously there's training and there's focus on communication and teamwork and breaking down hierarchy. And, my work in healthcare often brings me across hospitals and surgeons who are trying really hard to learn from aviation because of the advances in safety and how the track record has gotten, well, never, not perfect. The track record has gotten so much better over recent decades. And I mean, it does seem like on another level, when there is a really bad event, there is a strong focus on learning.
Yeah, on learning from that particular event and pulling it apart. And I'd say one thing with aviation and healthcare is our use of checklists is, whether you're putting a person on the moon or you're just flying by yourself, it's the checklist really drives keeping things as tight as possible. And of course, when I say tight as possible, meaning that you're going to be within the parameters of the performance of the airplane that allows you to fly safely and minimize the risk of something catastrophic happening. And yet there's still that human factor that is, if you're kind of a person who really doesn't have the personal discipline to care about the checklist, then you're probably not a person who would be a good person to fly with, because it's all about being able to have that personal discipline. But then that goes to engineering, that goes to music. That same kind of discipline idea applies to those things too. And those are just two choices moments, every one of those. What level am I going to participate in this music? What level am I going to participate in this engineering? Or am I going to participate in this flight,
So again, as we wrap up here, I guess we're starting to, we'll prepare for arrival. What led to your writing of the book, Just Two Choices? Who is the book for? Is it about choices in really broad choices in our everyday lives, or who's the typical reader that you wrote this for?
Yeah, it's for broad choices in everyday life. Although I'm starting to tailor it, toward the business side of things as well. In terms of trying to have the Just Two Choices philosophy, as well as the visual itself. If you're a CEO of a company and you want to make sure that your vision and your mission are understood all the way to the frontline level, then the Just Two Choices model is a way of being able to translate your vision and mission into just two choices. So at the front line, the people who are eyeball to eyeball with your customers are making the kind of choices that you want them to make that are consistent with the vision and mission of the company. But overall, the book itself is a general thing, because it actually was birthed in a lot of ways, not just through aviation visuals, because when you look in a cockpit, there aren't hardly any words. They're just visuals. You fly by graphics, and your references to all your performances and stuff by looking at a visual without having to say anything. You know exactly where to move your controls and stuff. And so that's how the Just Two Choices is laid out. But there's another factor to that, and that factor is that I was working a lot for about 15 years with elementary school kids on goal setting, teaching a process called dreams plus action equals reality. And for many years, I'd say, hey, look, there are just two choices. Which choice of action are you going to take? And is that action going to take you closer to what you want, or is it going to take you further away from what you want? And so I kept saying just two choices over and over again. And that kind of evolved into a book of the book that we have that's there today, because I was going like, oh, all of life is just two choices, no matter what we do, our health, our wealth, relationships, career. Every moment we just have to, as I was listening to Karen's broadcast, it's the little choices that they all add up to the big results in everything in life.
Yeah.
And so pay attention to the being in the moment and making the choice now, and then you won't have to make a drastic choice later.
And as I saw you talk about, there's a video of you speaking at a Harvard group, and I'll post a link to that in the show notes.
Oh, thank you.
But I think about the choices that I'm going to have ahead of me this evening. I have a choice to exercise or not exercise. I have a choice of eating something healthy or not eating something healthy. I also have a choice to go sit and watch the hockey game instead of exercising. Maybe I can figure out how to do both. But there's two choices, right? As you frame it, a choice that takes us to our goal of, let's say, health, or a choice that takes us away from that goal is the summary it seems to come across, right?
Can I add one thing there? Because you just inspired another thought here. Sure. Yeah, the other thought that comes to mind is what you talked about with Karen Ross. And I'm of the similar philosophy, which is, all right, I'm not going to go do an hour workout, but I am going to do something of 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm still going to watch the hockey game. You see what I mean? Or I'm going to do sit-ups while I'm watching the hockey game. Or you see, and so it's the incremental stuff that allows us to create those new habit patterns, that build the momentum that shift in the long run, have that big shift. And so I'm right in sync with you guys when you guys were talking about that particular subject.
Yeah, it seems like maybe a final thing I'll share. Lots of little good choices prevent the need for a really difficult good choice down the road.
Yes, the big hayaka at the last moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, our guest has been Rico Racosky, author of Just Two Choices. Rico, how can people buy the book, learn more about the book, connect with you online?
Well, thank you, Mark. Just go to just2choices.com. And actually, I've got 3 free downloads. If you go to just2choices.com/radio, even as a podcast, but /radio, you can get the welcome in chapter 1 for free. And then you can also get the Just Two Choices diagrams that you could actually cut out and paste around your house. One of them will show you how to make positive choices toward a new and better direction as to getting hooked back into your same old choice that gets you into that frustrating place where, well, not just you, but any of us into those things. Or if you're thinking about whether you should go after something or not go for it, there's another visual, Just Two Choices visual there, and you can just download all those at just2choices.com/radio with the number 2 for just2choices.com.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Rico, and thank you for
thank you, Mark.
Those giveaways. And I'll put the link to that in the show notes and encourage everyone to go check that out. So I feel like I haven't been flying as much recently because of the pandemic, but my brain is making me say something like, I know you have a lot of choices of where to come on as a podcast guest. So thank you for choosing My Favorite Mistake. To our listeners, I know you have a lot of choices about what to listen to. So thank you for joining us here on My Favorite Mistake. I don't have a loyalty program. Maybe I'll have to look into that.
Well, there you go. That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
So again, Rico Racosky, thank you for being a guest. Thank you for being a good sport with my attempts at airline talk.
Well, it's an honor and privilege, Mark. Thank you for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to pause and think about your own favorite mistake and how learning from mistakes shapes you personally and professionally. If you're a leader, what can you do to create a culture where it's safe for colleagues to talk openly about mistakes in the spirit of learning? Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. See you next time.